How's the inner work going for both of you? I don't know who else may join us or not, or um, I was in contact with Michael. We're sort of at cross communication, not in terms of the communication. It's that we're mixing up our communication, the times that we're supposed to link up and stuff like that. So he thought we were going to meet yesterday, and I didn't think we were going to meet yesterday because I knew I hadn't planned it because I had to prepare for today. But um, and I'm not sure what's happened to the others. I know that Mr. Gurdjieff's advice, his strong recommended advice, not his advice, what he told Uspensky in Search of the Miraculous is that if people drop off, you don't go chasing after them. You don't go try to find out what happened. This is an arduous path. It's a difficult path. For those who have an active magnetic center, we're trapped between a rock and a hard place. And, some people prefer to live a normal life. There have been many times in my life I would have preferred to have lived a normal life, but I just couldn't. Once my magnetic center was activated, once I had a taste for conscious influences, once I realized that there was a mystical path and that I was on it, there was no turning back, even though I must admit there were many, many times I wished I had turned back or could turn back. I tried to turn back, but once you're on the path, you can't. You're locked in. So, I know that Martin is very interested still. So is Michael. I've been in contact with both of them. So is Iman. Iman's probably somewhere still between Switzerland and Syria. Martin, unfortunately, is working for 2 months in the summer during these meetings. So hopefully after that 2 month period, he will join us. He just went on this big, I haven't talked to him yet, big outdoor 2 week adventure with a whole group of people, survival skills kind of thing. And I'll find out more. So any questions, bringing it back to our body, bringing it back to our breath, trying to ground ourselves in this moment, here and now, trying to be aware of the sensation of our body, trying to be aware of our body breathing, to be aware of the various things we can become aware of. There are cells in our brain that are specifically devoted to sensing the effect of gravity. We have other cells, other neurons in our brain that are specifically devoted to becoming aware of the sensation of balance. So how my head is balanced on my neck, which is balanced on my shoulders, which are balanced on my spine, which is balanced on my pelvic bones, which somehow is all fitting together. And so we also have, sensory nerve nodes for inside our bladder, inside our colon, inside our stomach, our esophagus, the external parts of our body. So as I'm talking about these different dimensions, I'm hoping you're bringing yourself back to them. The thing about being mindful, the thing about being present, about being aware of our body, being aware of our body here and now in this moment, perhaps aware of what we can see, what we can hear, what we can smell, what we can taste, sensing our body both internally and externally, gravity, balance. We also have sensors for hot and cold. We have sensors that generally we don't really even know that we do because we don't live, at least where I am, the atmospheric pressure. I have sensors inside me for determining the atmospheric pressure. But, if I lived, say, in Denver and was going up and down mountains all the time, it might be an important sensation to have. But where I am, my level above sea, where I am above sea level doesn't change a lot. So there's no real need for my body to become aware that I've gone too high or I'm right down at the ocean or whatever. But, these are things that we should continually be monitoring. We should be continually bringing ourselves back to our body, back to what is real, back to this moment here and now. Any comments, any questions? Now that we're just a really small group, I can focus a little bit more on specific problems that we may be having, questions that we may have. We've gone through a lot when we think about all of the different exercises, the collected state, the breathing exercise, the 60 bone finger and toes exercise, the 10 joint illumination exercise, or the 12 joint exercise, of the 10 bone illumination exercise, the decision exercise, various different things. These are all foundational, all preliminary. But any questions, any concerns, any issues that you would like to raise right now?
Yeah, first I've been using the recording you made, the combined exercises, and I'm really grateful for that. So I just wanted to speak to that. It's been a little harder this week, but for the past couple of weeks I've been doing it almost every day. And I notice that I'll usually either before or after I'll do my sitting practice, my meditation practice, which is for me is very much stillness, sort of choiceless, just whatever comes up, basic mindfulness. And I've noticed that it's settled, and even though my mind will still be running, it's not, I'm not saying that's completely silent, but there's this silence and this peace, this stillness that's much more tangible than I'm used to. And I've been meditating probably 10 years now.
Yeah, you've gone on some major retreats as well, if I recall.
I have. And when I'm on retreat, after the first kind of rocky first few days, I'll settle into something pretty quiet. But usually not when I'm with my home practice, unless I'm really dedicating like an hour and a half a day, which I don't have time to do now. But with the recordings, I've noticed there's just much more stillness kind of around.
I mean, the recordings are really training wheels. Back in Mr. Gurdjieff's days, people would have to write little notes and then remember to do it, then train themselves to do it, and then do it on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about I'm actually starting today. I was going to do it after our meeting. I was going to start doing it off the recording, trying to remember the steps and the order of things. But I did want to stick with it for a while, just for you've got it down to almost exactly half an hour.
Yeah.
So it's easy to plan. When I do it myself, I can, unless I have a timer, it's hard to set up all the, do this for this, do this one. But
I was actually taught when I was in the Bennett group that inner exercises shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. But you can do like 3 of them in a group meeting kind of thing, but you don't want to keep them long. But, the first 12, 13 minutes of that one is a relaxation exercise. So I figure I can get away with it. But are you bringing this into your life? Are you sitting, in a dentist's office waiting to see the dentist, or a doctor's office, or some appointment you have, going wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, and working through, like that would be the 10 bone illumination exercise? Or are you walking down the street, or even doing garden work or whatever, where you're moving your joints and sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us, and going through the actual joints?
I'm not doing the joints, and that's something I've been wanting to do. I have been doing the 60 bone, 30 bone. What did I?
60. Yeah, we've got 15 in each each hand or foot. So together it's 60.
Yeah, the 60 bones. I have been doing that. I've continued to do that in the mornings when I first wake up. I think we talked about that maybe last week or the week before.
Yeah.
And I'll do that one throughout the day. I also haven't been doing the illumination, the bone illumination exercise during the day, and I would like to start with that one. But the 60 bones exercise is really showing me how my mind gets distracted and how easily I get pulled away. And you know, that's what meditation is supposed to teach you, but I've never noticed it so sharply as with this, because it's such specific focus points
Yeah.
that move and change, and the words along with it, and then all of a sudden I'm caught in some fantasy, you know, or thinking about my day, and I'm like, what just happened? Where did it go? But being in the sensation, it's easier to remember the moment where it shifted, because it's like, oh, the last thing I remember was, you know, this finger.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, okay. So, and the coolest thing was, I think earlier this week, I noticed, I actually felt the moment leading up to it. Like I was, you know, I was this finger, this finger, this finger, this finger, or whichever. That's actually the wrong order. But, you know, I got through the first hand, and then I went to the foot, and I got to like the second or third toe on the foot, and the words of the prayer started sort of doing like that. And then I noticed suddenly was thinking, I think at that point I was thinking about Mr. Gurdjieff or something. My mind just went off.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, I watched it. I watched the resistance come in. Like that's what it felt like. There was like, I was trying to push through something, and it kind of swept me away, and then I came back to it.
Yeah.
But that was,
you know, it sounds, you know, using the language of the work, that you hit the Fa bridge, between me and Fa, where things tend to derail, and we don't have enough energy to keep them on track. And it sounds like you noticed that.
yeah.
What about, you know, bringing it into the rest of your day? Mr. Gurdjieff said, you know, one of his famous phrases is, remember yourself always and everywhere. So to set aside aside time in the day to do these inner exercises is very good, particularly in the morning, because that somehow sets your day up. It makes it easier. You kind of coast along and can do more work when you actually begin doing these inner exercises in the morning. It's good to have a structured routine in the morning, to follow a plan, but the goal is always and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you're sitting down to dinner in a restaurant, and in that moment, you might not be able to go through the 10-bone illumination exercise, or you might be able to. Maybe you're with a group of people and you've decided what you're going to have, and the waitress is going around the table ordering the food, and you could just be in your own little bubble, just grounding yourself in your body, saying some kind of internal prayer or whatever. Or you're in the toilet and you can just become aware. I mean, for me, I like to do the finger one. I'm going to put this up. I've been practicing. I've been trying to get my left hand and right hand so that I used to do them all with my left hand. And Francis introduced me to doing them with both hands. But I like to just do this when I'm in the toilet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, and just work through my fingers. But what about, have you started to practice them throughout the day? I'll start with you, Ian, and then I'll move to Guido.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'm not doing the specific ones throughout the day. Like I said, I'll do the 60 bone in the morning, and then I'll go through usually in the afternoon, sometime around 2 or 3. I'll go through. Oh, I've also been doing the arms to the side. I forgot about that, but I have been doing that every day. Haven't made it to 7 minutes yet, but yeah. So I have that in the morning.
You start shaking yet? Do you get to the point where you can shake?
Yeah.
Shaking in your stomach.
Yeah. I think so. I mean,
when
there's this like fluttering.
You start shaking in your stomach and your solar plexus. Pay very close attention to that. In the third series, Mr. Gurdjieff talks about he talks about the reverberations we can feel in our solar plexus coming up from our stomach, and he said normally he doesn't recommend, and he actually actively goes against telling people to use their imagination and to imagine certain exercises being successful. but that's the only one, or maybe not the only one, but it's one where he actually gives this explanation that I don't normally tell you to imagine. But if you can't do it, if you can't feel the reverberations, imagine them coming up from your stomach. So to try and set something rolling. And years ago, I actually experienced the reverberations. I think actually I first experienced them. It was the Wednesday between Christmas and New Year's, between 2004, I believe it was. And I was on the subway and I began to feel these reverberations, weird things in my stomach, and leading to certain effects in my life, particularly my relationship with light. It would disappear, come back, disappear, come back. But I found, and I can't really do it now because I've got a shoulder injury, when I held my hands out and I got to the point of exhaustion and I could feel this, the solar plexus just shaking. It was the same shaking, the same reverberation. I forget where he says it. It must be in the new G.I. Gurdjieff Paris meetings, 1943, where he talks about that there are two different and distinct effects of holding your arms out. So one of them, I'm sure, is the reverberation in the solar plexus, and the other is there's a certain body-brain tension in muscles and stuff like that, and the reverberation is actually feeling brain. So pay attention to that.
There's I notice it happens pretty quickly. There'll be sort of a it feels very childish, sort of a like, what are you doing? And it's not the words, but there's kind of a panic that comes up that seems to be a feeling.
Yeah.
But I'm still, it's only been a few weeks, so I'm still trying to work with it.
Mr. Gurdjieff also said that someone who had been with him for like 30 years was able to do it for 2 hours and they got no effect from it. And at that point, you could just sense Mr. Gurdjieff just shaking his head and going, why do it for 2 hours when you don't get any benefit from it? But this person had trained themselves to do it, but they weren't doing it correctly. They weren't doing it with the proper intent, the proper focus. What about you, Guido? How are things? Are you just caught a little too much right now in your pain?
Listen, I've been trying to combat, trying to understand either that what is primary for me. Of course, I understand that the work it has no questions that is the first important thing that I can do for my being. But the problems that I have are taking me away from every intent of perform the situation like it is, Doing the exercises and everything is very complicated for me now when I'm trying to recover the legacy that I create throughout my life. And every day it sounds to be complicated, but it's some kind of light opens and the lawyer offered me some ideas to recover what I need. I need to come back to my.
Yeah, I mean, for those who may be watching later, Guido has had two major setbacks in the last number of years. One has been financial. Someone in a position of authority that he trusted so far seems to have gotten away with stealing money from him. And the other thing is, a little over a year ago, I believe it was, he had a bit of his tongue cut out for cancer. And there's a pain associated with that. So he's got the financial pressure and the financial pain as well as the physical pain. And the problem, I'm going to use these sort of as a sort of slight teaching stories in terms of, you have a piece of land or whatever. You hire a lawyer. The lawyer steals it from you. And there are two ways to view it. One is from the inside, you get very identified, very emotionally identified with the actual fact, of the land or whatever it was, and the theft and the betrayal of confidence. And it's the same with, having had cancer in the tongue, incredible pain coming back. You can get very identified, and it's very difficult in moments of that to step back and to disidentify with the actual pain, whether or not it's the emotional, psychic pain of, being stolen and taken advantage of, or the physical pain associated with the problem of the body. And this kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about today in terms of identification. This is a very important concept in the work. And a way I can describe it is, when I was 16 years old, I fainted and I passed out. I just fell forward and I hit concrete with my chin. And I split my chin open. I've got a nice scar under here, under the beard. And I had sand in my mouth, and I put my finger in, and it wasn't sand, it was my teeth, and they all crumbled away. Half of my teeth were broken. It took me years to, get them capped and the various different things that the dentist went through. But I went into the dentist, and he looked at it and he said, I can't do anything for 6 months until the nerves die down. And I was in constant pain for nearly 2 years in my mouth. And then I woke up one day and my brain had obviously rewired itself, and I was no longer in pain. But for some reason, and I don't know where or how, I developed this internal sense. Perhaps it was an echo of some previous incarnation, or who knows, whatever. But I never, ever felt bad for myself. It was like, this is what happened. You take it on the chin, and I never complained. I never got involved with identification. I never identified with it and said, oh, poor me, why did this happen to me? I can't believe that this happened to me. What did I do wrong? I never had any of that. And I realized subsequently, there have been many times in my life where I've had pain and I've gone, oh, what did I do to deserve this? But for that 2-year period, for that specific problem, and it was my whole mouth, I took it and I suffered objectively. This is what happened. I fell. It was an accident. I should have been more careful. I should have been more aware. I should have, I didn't blame myself. I didn't put myself down. I didn't scream at fate. I just consciously suffered. And this was long before I was aware of the term to consciously suffer. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there are 2 forms of pain. One involves pouring from the empty to the void. In other words, it is useless. And that's the mechanical suffering, and it's the suffering based on identification. It's the egocentric, egotistical, poor me, I can't stand that happened to me kind of suffering. And then there is the objective suffering, where it's just, you just objectively take it. You don't beat yourself up. You don't think, all those thoughts that a lot of people have. You just take it. And I had a business, and my business, I felt like Sisyphus, rolling a rock up a hill every day to have it roll back down on me. And I have to admit, probably half my time, and that lasted for 8 years, half my time in that I probably suffered consciously. The other half of the time, it was me squealing, like a little baby. What did I do to myself? How did I get myself into this mess? Me, 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 me. And I wish, and that was later. That was like 12, 15 years after the teeth. And I wished I had known what I know now and had tried and done my best to consciously suffer the whole bit about the business, just to kind of take it on the chin, so to speak, to take it like a man. These are just expressions, but not to get caught up in it, not to have my ego caught up in it. I don't know how beneficial that is, because there's certain pain, Guido, that you just can't ignore it, that automatically brings that mechanical suffering, that automatically brings a why me, what happened, what did I do wrong? But to fight that, to experience moments where you experience that pain, but you do it consciously. Now, last week I mentioned that I was going to talk about my continuation of the food diagrams. Let me just bring up the one that I was referencing last week. Here it is. Just give me a second. So yeah, the alchemy of human transformation. On the left, at the top, waking sleep. That's the state of normal man. Now, as I said last week, you do not know a person who's a normal man. This is someone who's sort of unsullied, someone who's sort of unbroken. They just exist in a more of a natural state. For most of us, we're a little too broken. We have a little too much damage to our being to fit the example on the left. But it's the transformational process. The higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. So right, if you can see my cursor, the higher is the positive square over there near the top left. Let me just bring this over. The middle is the ray, the lower is the do. So the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. So those aren't really represented properly because they really are like a triangle, but they're represented in terms of 3. So the whole movement up of food, it comes into our mouth, it meets our saliva, then we chew it and it goes into our stomach and it meets the digestive juices, and then it goes into our duodenum up to me, goes into our liver, fa, to the cerebral hemisphere, so right up into our cerebellum with la, and then the highest energy the natural human produces, and actually all humans produce, the highest energy that's naturally produced by a normal human is something called C12. And this is produced in our testes and ovaries for women, in our reproductive organs. So that's the picture of the normal man, the incomplete man. Another way to look at this is to, physically, we are born with our physical body complete. Even though we're born as babies, everything within our physical body, the DNA and everything, is all set to grow into adulthood unless some kind of instructions within the DNA or the RNA or whatever has gone wrong. We're born, fully developed physically, but emotionally, in terms of the octave of air, the air that we breathe in, the emotions that we feel, it's like we are a 24-week fetus. We're not yet viable outside of the womb, but we've developed up to a certain point. And so our emotional center, our astral being, our Kesdjan body, the various different terms we can use to describe it, needs the physical body in order to be incubated, in order to grow. There's very little chance that the astral section of us, development of us, could grow without the body. It needs the body. I'm just going to pull up something else if I can find it very quickly. I might not be able to. So it's like we're born with a fully developed physical body. It just needs to grow properly, but we're born with a barely viable emotional body. It's like half developed, and our intellectual body, our higher being body, is just in the germination state. That's like the zygote, or the multi, the blending of our father's 23 DNA and our mother's 23 DNA, and developing into the level of a tiny zygote. So that's the normal human being. We're born incomplete. We're born at a lower level. Nature can use us this way. We're not. It's not necessary for us to grow at a higher level. I'm just going to pull up another diagram. This came to me from someone who was involved in the Willem Nyland group. Here you can see this bottom triangle, the purplish triangle. That's man as he is born. And then the upper, the orangish triangle, is what we can grow, how we can develop. And so the bottom triangle, we're born with the fully developed physical octave. The octave of air is only half developed, and the octave of the soul or the higher being body only starts at the note do. And so, not the physical center, but the emotional center, it needs to be developed. It needs to grow, but it has a degree of activity. We're born with an ability, with a certain level of it working. Everything above the line, we have to grow. We have to develop. Let me bring us back to the original. So the alchemy of human transformation, we can see again the octave of food fully developed or almost fully developed, the octave of air not developed, only half, and the octave of impressions almost not developed. We don't need that awareness to come in, that energy to come in through our head brain, looking, listening, smelling, tasting. All of that information is able to be directly transformed into energy for our brain. So it does not need to be transformed up or down in order to feed us. We can feed directly on it and function on it. Then comes the first conscious shock. This is self-remembering, and this is proper advanced self-remembering. So this isn't just head brain and body brain self-remembering. This is three-brain self-remembering. And here the important things are La 24 right there, Fa 24, and Re 24. These are the different molecules of mindful awareness. Law 24 of the octave of food is the sensation of self. It's the awareness of gravity. It's the awareness of the balance of my body. It's the awareness of temperature, atmosphere. It's the awareness of the inside of my stomach, my bladder, my colon, the awareness of the movement of my lungs, the awareness of the sensations on my body. That is fueled by Law 24. Fa 24, however, is a more emotional state. This is the mindful awareness of what I am feeling. For a lot of people, they feel emotions that are pretty low. They're actually down in the range of 96 or even 48. They're very mechanical or very dark, explosive, homicidal emotions. And so most people are not even aware that they are feeling anything. But when we begin to become aware, that is mindful of what we are feeling here and now in this moment, and we begin to pay attention to our primary feeling circuit, which runs from just above our navel up to our tear ducts, and try to determine what the emotion we're feeling. And for most people, it's usually anxiety, or despair or anger. And those are very mechanical, habitual emotions. So it's very hard to observe them because they are mechanical. And by definition, when we're in the mechanical state, we lack that self-reflective capability. But when we begin to become mindful of what we're feeling, we are then transforming law 24. The manifestation, the expression of that energy is the mindful awareness of what we are feeling. And then we come to Ray 24, which is the mindful reception of external impressions. So this is primarily what we see, hear, smell, taste. To be aware of my eyes receiving visual impressions from my environment, to be aware of the sounds that I can hear, the sounds coming in my ear, to be aware of the smell and the taste in my nose and in my mouth. To be mindful. This mindful awareness is fueled by Ray 24. But this process gets distorted. What happens, we have the fully functioning physical body, the octave of food on the left, and the C12. That's the highest energy that's naturally produced by a normal human being. It's produced in our testes or ovaries. It's part of an octave of transformation of food that begins with our mouth, our stomach, our duodenum, our liver, our cerebral hemispheres, our cerebellum, and then down to our testes. And it's the highest energy that a natural human being produces. Now, last week I talked about how the higher needs to blend with the lower to meet in the middle. So for La 24, Fa 24, and Ray 24, they all need something of the level of 12 to meet something at the level of 48. And these are all connected to, 1 is the absolute, 3 is the eternal unchanging, 6 are represent the archangels or the holy denying, 12 is the sun, 24 is the planetary realm, 48 is the earthly realm, 96 is the lunar or moon realm. If you go back to last week, it's explained in greater detail. But in order to experience anything at the level of 24, which is the planetary realm, we need a little solar energy to meet with a little earthly energy. And these, when I say we need a little solar energy to meet with a little earthly energy, these are qualities that have to be present within inside our body. So to have Law 24, it has to meet with, we have something at the level of 12, has to meet with So 48 of the octave of food in order to be transformed into Law 24, which is the mindful awareness of my body, of the sensations of myself. The mindful awareness, for instance, of gravity, of balance, of internal and external sensations, that physical awareness of my organic body as one organic whole, so to speak, is that particular molecule being properly transformed by the higher energy. However, in the normal human being, if you look over in the left side, the octave of food, the physical body dimension, is the only one that's properly developed. And for the other two to begin to develop, there has to be a proper process. So we've got to consciously become aware of what we can see, the light, the photon, sort of a global awareness, an impartial awareness of what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm smelling, what I'm tasting. There's 10 million photoreceptors in my eyes, and these photoreceptors are tuned for all sorts of different things, some for peripheral, some for focal, some for color, some for gray. So to be aware of the sort of impartial receiving of light through our eyes. We've got tiny hair in our ears that vibrate. So the sound waves cause these hairs to vibrate, and that sends sound. It's transformed into the electrical impulses, sound in our brain. So to consciously and properly receive the impressions that are coming into us is what we're supposed to do. But if we do not have the higher molecules within us, these are the little white squares with the plus signs, which are supposed to be already within us. If we do not have the proper higher molecules, these processes cannot complete themselves. We can partially complete, say, we can bring the octave of impressions up ever so slightly by reminding ourselves to become aware of the screen in front of us, to become aware of the different colors we can see, the shape of the screen, to become aware of the keyboard perhaps in front of the screen, the colors of the image upon the screen, to become aware of what we can hear, the sound of my voice, perhaps the sound of traffic outside, to become aware of what we can smell, perhaps the smell of coffee or whatever. We can hack this process. We can pull ourselves upwards. But unless we have the higher molecules, unless we've done the inner work that allows us to naturally accumulate those higher molecules, we run out of energy and we run out of steam and we're not able to do it. And this is why it's much harder to be mindful than it is to be mindless, because to be mindful requires these higher particles in our being already existing within us. To be emotionally mindful actually is the hardest one. It's the most difficult one for normal people. Normally the way that self-remembering is taught is the head brain is like the positive end of the battery, and the body brain is like the negative end. The head is the affirming. It represents the wholly affirming part of ourselves, the affirming, the positive. The body represents the negative, the denying, the passive. The head brain, the active. So when I consciously look, listen, smell, and taste, and I really try to perceive the external dimensions of this room through my vision, hearing, smell, and taste, I'm actually activating the positive node of my body. And then while remaining aware of the sensation of self, while remaining aware of my body becomes the negative diode, and between the positive and the negative, the current is created, and that current leads to the development of feeling. So in the schema of these teachings, there are different levels of self-remembering that's taught. The first level is the head brain combined with the body brain. But we can define self-remembering in these teachings as any two-centered form of awareness. So it doesn't have to involve the head brain. We can become mindful of our feelings and sense our body is actually a form of self-remembering. But the proper, most advanced form of self-remembering is the three-brained version that is represented by the center piece. This is the complete three-brain, head brain, body brain, feeling brain, externally perceiving, internally sensing, and feeling. Doing all three of those. This internal diagram represents that when it's working and we're doing it properly. However, as I said, the human machine doesn't work this way. I'm going to pull up another diagram. This diagram, let me just, is the same diagram. This is just done on Open Office Calc, or I think Excel worksheet. So C12 I've turned in blue. And then C12, it exists at the level of 12. And the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. There's an exact equivalence. 12 cannot blend with 192. It has to blend with 48. So like 1 has to blend with 6. It can't blend with 12. 3 has to blend with 12. 6 has to blend with 24. So there are 3 orders apart in order to create a middle level. So 12 has to blend with 48 to equal 24. And unfortunately, with the octave of air, which the middle one, this is our emotions. Our emotions are somehow able to steal C12 of the octave of food and create some kind of, I don't like to use the word, and I do like to use the word abomination. And the same that can happen with the octave of impressions. And this is more represented within our thoughts. So our thoughts can grow in a very malignant fashion, a very lopsided, unfortunate fashion. So this energy, the C12, that is supposed to be used for the lawful awareness of my physical body to develop the sensation of self, gets siphoned away by our emotional center and siphoned away by our intellectual center. And as our intellectual center, there are a number of activities that we do that just waste the energy. And that, one of them is called, thinking with our feelings. There are advanced exercises of trying to think with your feelings. But in this situation, with this misuse of the energy, this is not an exercise that we should strive to do. It's where we are doing the wrong activity with the wrong center. Now, the state of sleep that's produced by this is a form of identification. The state of sleep, quite often this represents itself as formatory thinking, which is a very fancy way of just saying associative thinking. You get up in the morning and your mind just churns and churns until you go to bed at night. There hasn't really been rhyme or reason. It's just been this incessant internal dialogue, just wasting a lot of energy on saying a lot of nothing in your head. They've done studies on this, and they've determined that the average human being has something like 50,000 self-talks a day, of which they're only aware of about 3,500 to 4,500 of them. So this is just this excessive chatter that goes on and on and on. And when we do some of the exercises, like we think of the lower leg and imagine the marrow illuminating, and we say the word holy. And then we think of the lower left leg, the upper right leg, and we say affirming, and the pelvis holy. And then the upper left leg, the bone and the marrow holy, and the lower left leg denying, and then up the spine into the skull plates, affirming. And then to the right arm, transubstantiate, the upper arm, the lower arm, in me, the upper left arm, for my, and the lower left arm, being. By saying those words consciously, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me, for my being, with various body parts, we're actually linking the head brain with the body brain in a proper way. We are allowing these energies to be expressed properly. That's one of the reasons for doing mantras, for saying prayers, holy God, holy firm, holy immortal, have mercy on us, or sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. By doing that, we are preventing that formatory thinking. We are preventing that associative chatter from taking place in that moment. Now, that's just one of the dimensions that causes sleep when the C12 is brought in contact with the intellectual center. Another major problem is the use of imagination. Imagination is really just us having a wonderful time, patting ourselves on the back. Mr. Gurdjieff would take it one step further and call it a form of masturbation that does absolutely, it's useless. When I was a teenager, I used to live in my imagination, and I would set up these scenarios. I would lie down, and before I went to sleep, I would imagine I would knew how to drive cars before I knew how to drive cars, so I could go and rescue people and do. And when I look at it, when I go back and I replay some of those things that were so important to me as a teenager, I realized that I was doing it for a certain level of emotional comfort, that I was using my imaginative faculty of my head brain, which is a very, very sacred faculty, basically to just pat myself on the back and create these imaginary scenarios that just made me feel good. This is where Uspensky didn't spend a long enough time with Mr. Gurdjieff. Uspensky's not the final word on a lot of the teachings, and he talks about imagination and how wrong imagination is, and we've got to stop it. There's a higher use of imagination, and there's a lower use. The lower use is in service of some stupid subjective, and this is another quality of the misuse of C12. It's always a manifestation, and hidden underneath it is always the taint and the smell and the stink of the ego. So the imagination, the faculty that I should be able to use to objectively look at situations. Mr. Gurdjieff said that, we should think of something like a diamond, and a diamond has so many different facets, and we should use our head brain capacity to imagine, to explore the many different facets. So for instance, if you're left wing, you shouldn't only listen to left-wing media. You should force yourself on a regular basis to, listen or watch right-wing media, so that you can use this faculty of the intellect, this ability to imagine and see situations from various different points of view to get a clear understanding of situations. But most of us, when we use this faculty, it's done with the wrong energy. It's done with C12, which I also call the energy of identity, and underlying it when it's misused is the ego. So formatory thinking, just the normal associations that were around in our brain from morning to night, they're just a waste of energy. They are just allowing sort of the subconscious, unruly part of ourselves to control what goes on in our mind. So learning how to control that part, perhaps through affirmations, perhaps through prayers, perhaps through mantras. That's what these are all designed for. When we actually say a prayer and we're thinking, of my right wrist sources, my right arm, my right shoulder divine, my left hip rejoicing, my left knee revolts, my left ankle end, my left right ankle sufferings, my right knee direct, my right hip your, my left shoulder actions, my left elbow on, my left wrist us. We are focusing that energy. We are causing it to come back into the moment. Even doing counting exercises such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 3. And there's a sequence, the way the numbers moving. These are all Gurdjieffian numbers. I will talk about, these exercises with numbers and everything later on, but it's just a way of harnessing the brain and getting the brain to begin to try to work with the proper energy. And again, the misuse of energy in the intellectual center, you will notice that underneath it, Mr. Gurdjieff used to say that there was a vehemence, but there's the ego that's underneath it. And included in this wrong work of the intellectual center, and how it's stealing stuff from the emotional center and doing all sorts of weird things. For instance, the whole Olympic and athletic industry that we have in this world is all fueled by the misuse of C12. The desire to be number one, the desire to be the winning team, the desire to win, the desire to beat is all a manifestation of this. And the misuse of C12 is also found in fashion, the whole entire fashion industry, the entertainment industry, the culinary industry, even though Mr. Gurdjieff was very, very big on food that was really nutritious, that tasted really good. But he was also very big on the quality of vibrations that the cooks use, so no swearing in the kitchens and whatever. So, you know, it's not that culinary and proper preparation of food is not important, but the whole restaurant industry and the way it's sort of become in our world, there's a certain degree of very much of ego underneath it all, very much of unreality. Whenever we give these parts energies, you know, through this form of identification, we are actually building houses on sand. There is no firm foundation. There is no firm stability. I liken it to a spray bottle. We can spray ourselves and coat something that's real. And every time we spray ourselves, you know, let's say it's paint, we put a little layer on and we add a new layer. But if we spray the paint in the wind and on nothing, it goes to nothing. And so that energy is just sprayed on nothing when it could really be used to form our being. Because every time we spray it on what is real, the sensation of myself, the awareness of my body, the awareness of my breathing, it's like we are creating a little dusting inside ourselves. We are painting a little layer. And as we dust and paint, we actually build something substantial. We build the inner body. We build the Kesdjan body through the collecting of these emanations, through doing things properly. This way is dispersing them. So I've been talking about this section here. This is the intellectual center's misuse of this energy. And another way that the intellectual center misuses this energy is through lying. A lot of times we lie and we don't even know that we're lying. We read an article on global warming and we picked up some facts from the article on global warming, and we're having a conversation and we suddenly throw these facts in. Now the reporter, they went and they talked to a scientist and they recorded in their notebook these facts. For the scientists, these facts are actually authentic. They learn them, they understand them. The journalist parrots them. And then we take what the journalist parroted and we parrot those talking points. And we make it seem like we are these experts in topics that we have no expertise in. Mr. Gurdjieff didn't really like journalists. He considered them a very maleficent force in this world, because a journalist would go and they would study a story and they would pretend to be experts in the story and they would write it up and people would believe that they were experts. It's in the newspaper, it's here, it's written down, and they would take a lot of speculation, a lot of fantasy as if it were reality. And they would then begin to take on these beliefs. So, you know, that's another big problem with the head brain. Taking on these beliefs is a form of lying. If I talk about something that I read in the newspaper and all of the information I got came from the newspaper and I talk like I'm an expert, I'm lying. But there are many, many other ways where we lie to ourselves, we lie to other people. How are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling fine, when we're not really feeling fine. And, you know, if we look at how pernicious lying is within ourselves, to the people we love, we lie all the time. And a lot of our lies we're not even aware of. It's just part of the superficial gloss that we give on things. So the head brain, the misuse of C12, it manifests itself in the form of imagination. Underneath that imagination, there's always a feeling and there's always the ego. It manifests itself as informatory or associative thinking, just the whirling of thoughts going on just taking up energy, and it manifests itself in the form of lying, claiming to know things that we don't know, speaking to others and not revealing, true things, and however the many different ways we lie. Then we come to the emotional center, and here the biggest manifestation of this is in the form of negative emotions. Getting really upset. But it's not just negative emotions, because there are some positive emotions that are here as well. It's egocentric emotions. So a lot of times the ones that we can begin to work on, or we can begin to notice the most, are when we get angry or fearful or anxious or depressed or despairing. What we think of those negative emotions, and if we look at them underneath them, we will see the ego, the anger. I can't believe they did that to me. Who are they to talk to me like that? What is going on? Ego, 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 ego. The fear, and it's very egocentric. And same with the despair. 95, at least 95% of all suicides are actually manifestations of the ego. It's life, look at me, and it's the misuse of this energy, and it's the negative emotions produced by this energy. People aren't suffering consciously, they are suffering mechanically, they are suffering subjectively, and my poor life, and I just can't stand it, and I don't want to be here. It's very, if you go to the bottom of it, if you examine it, at the basis, it's very egocentric. It's me, me, me. So, we can have, and not just the negative emotions, we can, very loving, we can fall in love with someone because of how they make us feel. They just make me feel so good. And in a lot of relationships, egos are sort of blended in the relationships, but the egoistic part is very much front and center in the relationship. It's how they make me feel, and it's not just relationships. We can pat ourselves on the back and, oh, I just love people and they love me so much. And we can peace and joy as well, we can experience them as very egocentric emotions. So it's not just the negative emotions where we manifest this misuse of this energy. So there are all these different versions, these different forms, and this is one of the reasons why in the work Mr. Gurdjieff talks about the need to really begin to sort ourselves. So, okay, what I'm feeling in the bottom of my feet is a sensation. What I'm feeling in the pit of my stomach is an emotion. What I'm hearing in the traffic going by outside is an external perception. And then to begin to observe some of these emotions. Now, the problem is in the mechanical state, it's very difficult to observe ourselves. This is where group work comes in. This is where partners come in. This is where people in life come in, because they can point and show us things about ourselves that we can't necessarily see. But this C12, this whole problem here, is the biggest impediment to our awakening. It is the biggest way any excessive energy is siphoned away and prevented from allowing us to experience the higher states of consciousness. Now, it's worse than this. It's not just that this steals the energy that we need in order to experience, more and more awakened moments and different levels of awakening. It's that when we misuse this energy, we are creating forms, we are crystallizing things within us. And even though there's an unreality to these crystallizations, it's every time we see something, every time we hear something, every time we smell, taste something, we are leaving an impression behind within ourselves. And we can call these impressions memories, but there's some physical change, some physical substance, something physically impressed, some kind of residue from what we perceived in the outside world makes it into the inside of ourself. And in a similar fashion, anything we think, anything we feel also leaves an impression behind within ourselves. It leaves a memory. We got really upset at someone. We think about that memory. It sort of reanimates that memory. But we've got it remembered. It's inside us. We've learned it. We've managed to crystallize or form this memory inside us. That's a very malformed memory. It's a very misformed, excuse me, and misshapen memory. So part of what we have to do is we have to begin to become more aware of the misuse of C12, of the misuse of this energy in our lives. And we've got to start using it correctly, but we also have to be aware that over our whole lives, and this is why there's no example of a natural, there's my dog just there, there's no example of a natural person in this world, because we've got all these misshapen impressions within us. We've got these wrong structures that have been crystallized within us, and we have to learn to decrystallize a lot of them. And this is where the process of remorse and remorse of conscience and working with conscience and repairing the past comes in. It allows us to sort of melt some of that, the improper crystallizations down. So this is why the work is so elaborate, but this is also why the work is possible. We can understand the work in relation to all of these diagrams. Let me just go back to the main one. So, you know, the C12 was the energy up there, and it gets misused. So we've got to realize that, you know, the distortions that we create in ourselves have to be corrected. They have to be cleaned up. We've got to stop this process of imagining, you know, of getting stuck in negative emotions. And, you know, a lot of these, what I'm talking about, the word identification applies. And in these teachings, identifying, you know, to be identified with something is to really lose awareness of ourself. Even though when we're really angry, you know, there's the ego there. The ego is not really ourself. The ego is underneath the manifestation of the anger and the screams and the words and the the whatever. Not our real self, not our true self. So we've got to start figuring out where we're wasting this energy. We've got to start to decrystallize, repair our past, to do all of that. It's all, everything that we're talking about is all found, you know, in these diagrams. If we understand these diagrams, if we can unpack them properly, it's all here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. I've spoken very quickly on a lot for the last 45 minutes. Any questions?
It's a lot of information.
A lot of information. You know, one thing, the misuse of C12 by the emotional center and by the intellectual center is where we are generally broken. It's so easy for the lower parts of our being to tap into that energy, which is not natural for it. And then it creates all these wobbles and distortions within ourselves. But one term that Mr. Gurdjieff used, and it's very important, is the sensation of self. This is the full awareness of my organic body as one whole, as the entire self. To develop this awareness of my physical body as one organic whole, to sense my whole body from the bottom of my feet to the top of my head, to become aware of the touch of air on my skin, the hair touching my head, the clothing touching, my body, to be aware of the effect of gravity on my body. How my seat, my buttocks are on the seat behind me, and my feet are on the ground, and the underparts of my thighs, my upper legs are on the sort of cushion of the seat, and to be aware of the sensation inside my stomach, in my bladder, in my body, is to correctly use this energy. So to become aware of ourselves. And I'm not doing, a formal inner exercise today, even though we should do this as part of all group meetings. But, this is being recorded as well, and do the inner exercises on your own outside of this meeting, and do them in the meeting. And by talking about this, we are doing them here and now in this moment. And so becoming aware of our body, really developing the sensation of self. If you can really be in your body, in your whole body, from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, side to side, front to back, if you can maintain that awareness of your whole body as one organic perception, in this moment, we are using this energy correctly. In the Gurdjieff teachings, in this process, to my understanding, the most important exercise that we can do, and one that we should strive to do always and everywhere, is the sensation of self. This is the foundational exercise. People have accused me of putting too much emphasis on this, or this is my full understanding of the teachings. No, it's not. This is just preliminary, but it is so essential to be aware of yourself breathing, to be aware of the sensation of your spine, to be aware of the bones in your body, to be aware of the position of your body in space, the effect of gravity, the balance on your body, to be aware of the temperature around you, the atmosphere around you, to be aware of all your external sensations, the sensation of clothing, skin, air, to be aware of the various parts you can observe or be aware of internally. This is such a foundational exercise because, number one, it is the proper use of C12. It is what C12 is designed to do, to bring this physical awareness, to be the higher that helps to blend with the lower in the awareness of our physical body, the presence of being here now. And there are many other reasons why self-sensing is the basic preliminary exercise that we have to learn to master. I already explained part of the reason, because at a certain point, we want to start becoming conscious of what we can see, conscious of what we can hear, conscious of what we can smell and taste. And our external impressions, the impressions that come through our eyes, ears, nose, and taste buds, should be in first position. These should be, the impressions that we receive in any moment. The receiving of an impression should be occupied with our head brain. If we are a triangle, it's like the top part of the triangle. The body should be like the bottom left side of the triangle. We have to be so good at self-sensing. We can hold it in the back of our awareness and receive impressions with our head brain while in the background of our awareness, sensing our body. So without that ability, without the work, the development of sensing our body, we won't be able to then begin to perceive with our head brain while sensing our body. And then there are other different things that happen. The proper full brain, three-brained mindful awareness to bring feelings in. If we haven't done the training, done the work to develop the physical self, to develop that sensation of self, we will be going back and trying to take care of it. So it has to become something that we've done over and over and over again, that we are so comfortable and so easily doing that it can become part of one half of what we're doing, and then it become 1/3 of what we're doing. So it's always important to focus on the sensation of self. But the more we can begin to properly evoke the other centers, so by doing the various prayers that we've been talking about, we bring the head brain and the body brain together. So we're actually doing that kind of an exercise, and we're slowly building up to this three-brained process. So bring your awareness back to your body. Try to think of all the different ways that you waste the C12 through imagination, through lying, through formatory thinking, through negative emotions, through identification. And I will actually go more into the process of identification, because something I haven't even touched upon is the difference between internal and external considering. And internal considering is me, me, me. But underneath, it's always the ego. Why didn't they respect me? Why didn't they thank me? Why didn't they pat me on the shoulder? A lot of me, me, me. But it can also be very negative. What did I do wrong? Why don't they like me? But it's all me internally considering myself, which is an extreme form of identification. And externally considering is focusing on other people. One of the best programs I've ever encountered to learn to externally consider is neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and the study of hypnosis, because you focus so much on the other person and receiving certain impressions. You want to create certain conditions, and so it's an ideal way of learning how to be more mindful in our communication, which is really what external considering is, really to be mindful in the way we move, our verbal body language, the words, all of that. So it's bringing our body, bringing our ability to communicate up to a mindful level. But again, this is a topic of, I could talk about that for at least half an hour on the process. But any comments, Ian?
I do have a question. I'm trying to put it together, but it's around what you're talking about, the misuse of C12. And the abnormal crystallizations.
Yeah.
If we manage to catch ourselves in a moment where we're irritated at somebody, say somebody's parked in my driveway, and I'm like, how can they do that? This is my driveway. Don't they realize I might need it? And it's very, that's an example of, I think, or something along those lines, of the misuse of C12.
Yeah, I mean, can you taste the ego? My driveway.
My driveway.
The thing about, once you start to taste the ego, you begin to notice the misuse of C12 a lot of places, because it's hidden quite often, but underneath it's the ego. How could they do that to me? But go ahead, your question.
So the question is, on the one hand, it seems like a good thing to do, if I manage to catch myself, be conscious in that moment, to do something to redirect do the bone sensing or conscious, something to kind of pull the energy out of that. But then the concern is that the wrong crystallization is activated, and then I have a reaction to that, and I never actually sit with the negativity enough to see what's actually going on and decrystallize it.
Yeah.
So is there a way I can make sense of, like, in that moment, is there something I can bring to it?
Well, I think here, some of the Buddhist practices would probably be, things that we should accentuate. We don't have time right now because we're almost out of time. But like you said, sitting with it quite often, rather than running away from it, rather than flipping into something else, digging deeper, going within it. Those aren't bad strategies, to go and reflect on it. Boy, I kind of lost myself when I was thinking about the parking this morning, and where did that come from? And perhaps doing some kind of, behavioral chain analysis of cognitive behavioral therapy, going back to try and figure out the trigger, and to really stepping into that, however you do it. And that would be a good idea. That would be something good to work with, rather than to necessarily just flip it my tendency is to flip into different things, and I figure if I do not support and maintain certain crystallizations within myself, and I've known this to be true, that if I just ignore them and don't give them any energy, over time they collapse. But some of the others are a bit more deep rooted. You have to actually go back and figure out what's wrong. You know, perhaps you were a child and you didn't have a lot of space, and people would take your cubbyhole or something at school, and this could go back to that point. But, you know, dwelling on it, reflecting on it is, in a sense, repairing the past. So
seems like it would suck at least some of the energy out of the
yeah,
identification.
yeah.
Cool.
Just to repair it, to get, you know, to figure out, you know, what we did wrong, and to, you know, spend a bit more time being mindful of it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful.
Good way of doing that. You know, it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
That's good for me.
Yeah. I mean, bring yourself back to your body.
Yeah.
Bring yourself. It's got so many benefits. You want to, like I said, you want to be able to have this awareness, so it'll never be automatic. Anything that's conscious, anything that's intentional can never be automatic. And when you learn to hold the sensation, the awareness of your physical self in the background, it's always like pressing a button, you know, like a dead man switch, where you take your finger off and it stops. And it's not a button that you can lean on. It's one, you know, you've got to press and maintain the pressure on that. So even, you know, when you're aware of yourself, it can never be mechanical. It can never be habitual, but you can do it, and you can do it in such a way that you can become aware of what you see, hear, smell, taste, while there's a part of you that's still pressing that button in the background, that's still doing it consciously. And then, you know, it's like juggling balls, and you got two balls you're working with, and then you've got to throw the third one in, feeling. But, you know, the thing about the system, it's all about baby steps. It's all about taking these, you know, starting with where we are, starting with what we have, and working on all these different dimensions of our being. So let's just bring ourselves back to the body. Let's just bring ourselves back to our breath. And as you breathe in, try to breathe in with all three parts, all three centers. So as you breathe in, imagine breathing in the active elements of the air that are around us, that we can breathe in, that we normally don't breathe in, that require this conscious act of breathing in order for us to breathe them in and keep them within us. So breathing in the awareness of your lungs expanding, perhaps try and bring a smile to your face, a smile to your eyes to add a joyful component. Breathing in with all three parts, with the head, body, and feelings. And then as we breathe out, imagining something stays within us. What stays, where it goes, how it goes, that's its own business. We are breathing in these higher molecules, and as we breathe out, imagining breathing out a gray fog while something stays. And as we breathe out, we represent this gray fog in our mind, our head brain. We become aware of our lungs pushing the air out, and we become aware, sensing the possibility of something staying within ourselves, while again trying to occupy our feeling brain and bring it online, perhaps smiling with the eyes or the lips. Breathing in with all three parts, breathing in the active elements of the air, breathing out with all three parts, and imagining something remains, and imagining exhaling the gray, foggy waste. This is a profound exercise that we should do every day, because this brings those higher elements into ourselves, which allows ourselves to grow at a higher level. It gives us the energy inside that we need to do the inner work. We will acquire that energy. We can do it over our inner work and over our practices. This just speeds it up ever so slightly. And the other important thing is to be aware that we have an atmosphere. The earth has an atmosphere. The sun has an atmosphere. All living bodies have an atmosphere. Even non-living bodies, even a cup has an atmosphere around it. Our atmosphere is created partly through our thoughts, partly through our feelings, partly through our sensations. There are a number of different components, but just imagine your atmosphere still. Imagine it quiet. Imagine everything that I talked about today, all of that still calm in the atmosphere. And in a moment, I'm going to count to 3. When I get to 3, just suck it in. Imagine sucking it in. But right now, imagine you have an atmosphere about 1.5 meters around you, 4 or 5 feet. This atmosphere, imagine it still, imagine it calm, and then 1, 2, 3, suck it in. And as you suck it in, imagine sucking in the elements, the emanations. And as you breathe out, imagine that what we talked about, imagine the inner work you've done through the last 1.5 hours remains within you as you breathe out. And practice, do this inner work. The interesting thing that a lot of disciplines, they say meditate, meditate, meditate. Mr. Gurdjieff breaks it down into so many subcomponents, so many different little things, understanding the human machine, understanding how we are made, how we are formed, and the misuse and the things that can go wrong. I love the system. I think it's a wonderful system. It has such depth and such complexity. It really gives a map of the whole process of alchemical transformation. At any rate, thank you for joining me today. Try one thing I didn't talk a lot about was the decision exercise that I went through last week. Try to decide things. One of the things that I started doing this week very quickly is I'm trying to walk by not stepping on any cracks on the sidewalk. So that really messes with the normal motor moving part of my brain, and I have to watch. And I want to walk, not stepping in any of the cracks, but I want to make sure that people don't think I'm drunk or whatever and I'm staggering about. So I'm trying to maintain a flow and not walking on the cracks, which is, very head brain, very body brain. That was the decision tasks that I set for myself. And it's a very interesting one. I'll talk about it a bit more next week. Okay, sorry, I took up a lot of this talking and everything. Blessings. Hopefully we'll see you again next week. Decision exercise. Try to do all of this. Okay, take care. Bye now.